Good afternoon. It's Speak a Little French at Big Tree Harare, clocking in here on Easter Monday. And we are outdoors at Cape Canaveral at Big Tree Harare. Cape Canaveral is a small area of lawn on what I call the southern pan. Because we've got a bit of a panhandle on the shape of Big Tree Harare's property, and I call the panhandle Idaho. That's where you drive into the property. But because of that, I've thought through the north, south, east, and west pan of the property, and Cape Canaveral is an area of lawn where we are now on the southern pan. And I'll talk you through it a bit, because we were in a position where there was no even ground when they were talking about my diagnosis as a schizophrenic. And so what we had to climb out of the dark, deep hole that is a mental health diagnosis, and we had to climb right out of it from the bottom. And we actually, Speak a Little French, has won a victory in terms of being a man who is completely normal and sane, and doesn't have the so-called schizophrenia that he was diagnosed with by the doctors. That's me, Speak a Little French. But part of that, it was the same kind of thing that everyone in the world is faced with in terms of the night sky. There's no ways to get into the night sky apart from becoming an astronaut or whatever. But what happened is, in a dream, I actually got into the night sky and I swam around the universe. I've actually had a dream where I swam around the universe. And in order to stabilize my dream life, I had to transport a lot of information across the divide, the so-called night sky divide. And that's where I thought through having a property like Big Tree Harare to stabilize the night sky on, in order to get a link, a bridge, by which we could communicate with each other across that divide. And that's where I came up with the idea of the White House and the Kremlin in the first place. Through the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, United States of America. And you get things like Cape Canaveral is the launching pad of some of the rockets that NASA puts into space. And so we thought, let's have a representation of that in terms of Big Tree Harare. And that's where we came across this small piece of lawn here, which we decided to call Cape Canaveral. It's actually just adjacent to a bed and breakfast room where we have guests. But we just ignore that and just call it Cape Canaveral, to give the guests a bit of privacy as well. So anyway, when there's no guests, we can come here anytime and do our situational with diving into the night sky. Now, if you've ever done that, you'll know what I'm talking about. You have an out-of-body experience, and you actually lift off your feet off the ground and get sucked into the universe. There's a kind of Nikola Tesla reversal to gravity that given a bit of practice, any human being can harness. Anyway, we're going on for 5 minutes, and I just wanted to introduce you to Cape Canaveral, and we're going through a bit of a story here. So I'll be with you in a minute. I'm just going to pause the video, and we're going to continue on the next video. Hi, hello again. So now we're out at Phoenix, which is out on the western pan, where the sun's going down behind us, and we call this Phoenix because it turned into a very precious outdoor place where we've got a bit of the general bushveld being represented. And it's very unusual to have bushveld in a suburban property, but we do. And that's because we're in Harare. And this is Phoenix at Big Tree Harare, where we are now. Myself speak a little French at Big Tree Harare. Phoenix, Big Tree Harare. And Phoenix came through because I needed somewhere outside to do my cigarette smoking. And there also wasn't an extra room. They've recently built, or in the last few years, built a kitchen onto my room. So I've got space to live in my room, which I call NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, like where we were talking over at Cape Canaveral about. And so what happened here at Phoenix is I was doing my painting of pictures, painting pictures on the White House veranda. And it gave me some privacy. So when we had people coming and going, I didn't have to interact with them. I could hide out at Phoenix in my chair. And I would have to carry my chair in and out every day, which was quite an effort. And that's why I don't often come out to Phoenix and do that much, because of the weight of my chair. I'm getting a bit old, and carrying things is not that easy. But anyway, there's reasons why we call it Phoenix, and one of them is to give the night sky a representation, because Phoenix is a constellation of the night sky, representing the bird, phoenix bird rising from the ashes, and so you have this image of rejuvenation in the phoenix bird. It overcomes its death and it rises out of the fire into a second life, and that's a metaphor for all of us to overcome problems and get on with the next thing in life. And anyway, I came along here and I had different sitting positions around the area we call Phoenix. And it was, I would spend a couple of months in one area and then move my chair a couple of meters away the next time for a couple of months. And eventually I had what I call a tree that I sat under just over here. And that I would call my teepee, my Native American teepee, or wigwam, as they sometimes call it, a tent, a Native American tent called a teepee. And so yeah, that's Phoenix, and so we had what I used the technique of an empty chair, because after I'd finished spending time at Phoenix and they'd built me a room, I could spend time in my room more, and so I didn't have to come out to Phoenix, and I moved my painting situation into a studio at the back, which I'll introduce you to at the end of our sessions in a few days' time, but. The empty chair technique is a psychotherapeutic technique where you imagine that someone that's not present, either not physically present or sometimes deceased, is you imagine them in the chair, in the empty chair, and you talk to them as if they're actually there. That's a psychotherapeutic technique. And the psychotherapy comes through the father of modern hypnosis, Milton H. Erickson, MD, for medical doctor. And he was a medical hypnotist a century ago in Phoenix, Arizona. And that's where we get our Phoenix from, because Phoenix is recognized as the home of Milton. And so we also have our representation of hypnosis here at Phoenix. And it's got a wonderful side effect of having a beautiful piece of wilderness in the city of Harare here. We've got a beautiful garden at Big Tree Harare, and it's a wonderful way that we can represent environmental concerns and generally the Zimbabwean community, because they have a chance to be in the outdoors. We don't always have to be inside a building. So that's Phoenix. And next we're going to move along to NASA, which is my room. So this is Speak a Little French, and here we are at NASA. You can get a bit of a view of NASA at the outside there. You can see what we're looking at on NASA. There's the bedroom windows, and there is the kitchen windows and the kitchen door. And there's a beautiful yellow flower tree here. So that's a bit of... Hello, Speak a Little French here at Big Tree Harare. Now we're at NASA at Big Tree Harare, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, United States of America, here at Big Tree Harare in the Republic of Zimbabwe. And NASA is on the northern pan. Remember when I was at Phoenix, I mentioned to you that we were on the southern pan. Well, to some extent that was the southeast, but this is generally the north, and we're near the entrance to Big Tree Harare here, where when you come down the panhandle, you reach the gate, and that's where we are, just near there. So we hear the cars coming and going endlessly at Big Tree Harare at NASA. Anyway, what we thought is if we had a solid base in terms of a scientific community, and we were, as a school student in Zimbabwe, we went through learning about the sciences, and as compared to so-called religious ideas, which were also presented at school. And so we had a strong community of scientists, science teachers and science students, and going through things like chemistry and biology and physics at school. And so we've been in touch with a scientific community since we were kids. And so it's nothing new to be talking about the night sky. It just happens to be what we focused on in terms of having to bridge the gap between swimming the universe and between standing on 2 feet on planet Earth, as we normally do. And so we thought, let's have a representation of NASA being the most popular astronautical, all that kind of organization, the most popular organization as far as the night sky goes on Earth. And so you get in touch through NASA with bodies like the International Space Station and the so-called Russian equivalent of NASA. And we just don't talk about the Russian equivalent of NASA. We avoid that and go through the White House and the Kremlin in Moscow in Russia, because that stabilizes the entire world. So we've got a bit of a microcosm here at Big Tree Harare compared to the macrocosm of the global community. And so although there's politics mixed in with it, our focus is as being a scientific community with a spiritual aspect to it. We're not Christian, we're not Islamic, we're somewhere in between, more of a Zen kind of feel to it, but something spiritual in an Aquarian age. But we don't really harp on about the Aquarian age. We just think about the constellation of Aquarius in the night sky, or the star sign Aquarius. So we have a spiritual aspect, but it was more of a science before, the metaphysics, the scientific community around the spirituality. So that's just out of interest, because we don't want to offend anyone who is God-fearing in any way. We have our own idea of the human spirit, and we pay attention to the sciences. As in terms of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, where we are here, we talk about astronomy. And we also have a thought to the pseudoscience of astrology, which is star signs that you find in magazines. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand all these concepts and how we can communicate across the divide between me sitting in my own room at home and me flying across the universe in my Homo sapien body, as if I was a human bullet. And that's what happened in the dream, is I lifted off the terra firma and I was shot into space somehow, and I was naked. And that's where we come back to Cape Canaveral, because I stepped out naked onto the runway at Cape Canaveral, 3, 2, 1, blast off, and off I went into the night sky. And this was in a dream, and it actually happened to me. And it was an incredible dream. And it went on forever, and it had all these parts to it. In one part of the dream I was a psychologist, in another part of the dream I was an astronaut, in another part of the dream I was a journalist. All that kind of thing mixed up in the dream life. And I have a lot of déjà vu in terms of that. And I kind of understand it as a kind of what we call duality. I have a tremendous difficulty with duality in this case, because there was two physical bodies. The physical body I had when I was dreaming, and the physical body I have now sitting here at home at Big Tree Harare. So that takes you through Big Tree Harare a bit more. So we went through Cape Canaveral, Phoenix, and now NASA. And we in the first two videos of Speak a Little French, we went through the White House and the Kremlin. So we've touched bases, and the next thing we'll have to do is go through some of the connecting pathways around the garden that give us sorry, that was my Facebook calling, don't worry about it. Some of the pathways that connect us between NASA and the White House, NASA and the Kremlin, all this kind of thing. We'll have to go through in a subsequent video, because this video is finished now. Anyway, very good to meet you. Speak a Little French here at NASA at Big Tree Harare.